we are going to have a panel on how, so the panel is called Idealists versus Realists, a debate on ETH2, Layer2, Rollups, and more, which will be moderated by Ken Freund from the EEA.
Great, welcome everybody. Did everybody want to come on screen? Andreas, Daniel, Didier, and Taz? Please join me and we'll get started. We've got 20 minutes here to talk about ETH2, so-called EthKillers, Layer2, including rollups and scalability solutions. So it'll be a quasi form of a debate, a little bit of for and against or benefits and risks. So why don't we do a quick round of introductions? Didier, turn your mic on, and why don't we start with Taz and make our way around?
Yeah, so I'm Tosh Dienish. I work at the Ethereum Foundation on ecosystem support, which includes a variety of things, but one of them is working with the EEA, and I co-chair the EEA mainnet interest group.
Didier Floch, I work for Consensus. I'm the technology lead of the fintech and DeFi product group within Consensus called Codefi, and we span use cases from digital assets and CBDC all the way to staking and crypto financial services into MetaMask, for example.
Daniel?
I guess that's me. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Daniel Ivanov, and at the moment I'm blockchain solutions architect at LimeChain, which is a development services company with more than 100 blockchain and DOT related projects for the past 4 years. I've been heavily involved with working on dApps and doing audits for the last couple of years, as well as managing permission to Ethereum-based networks and being active in the Polkadot and Hedera Hashgraph networks as well.
Great. Andreas.
Dr. Andreas Freund, the blockchain Swiss Army knife, working with startups, consortia, EA, and Ethereum Foundation on everything related to blockchain, from infrastructure through protocols, products and applications, decentralized economics and governance, as well as legal and regulatory questions, and across pretty much all industries that are touched by blockchain, aka pretty much everything.
Great. Okay, Taz, let's start with you. So let's start with ETH2. So do you want to expand upon the benefits of ETH2, whether that's throughput, energy efficiency, given its Earth Day, or network economics? So
yeah, well, sure. There are a lot of exciting things about ETH2. So yeah, given that it's Earth Day, I think the energy efficiency is an important one. People have been complaining recently about proof of work as wasteful, and indeed I agree that it is. So ETH2 will reduce the energy consumption by something like 3 orders of magnitude, and stop wasting all that electricity. So I think that's an exciting one. Network or ETH issuance going down is also exciting. It'll reduce the inflation rate from something like 4 or 5% today to probably less than 1%. So that's good for the long-term economics of Ethereum. And then obviously throughput is probably the most important one. That's kind of the main driving force behind it. And that'll come later in the sharding phase. But the cool thing is how ETH2 and Layer2 kind of work together and are synergistic, because that having the sharding, so the additional capacity of ETH2 shards to finalize data will be helpful for optimistic rollups to increase rollup throughput. So they kind of multiply their effects.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to go to Andreas. So Andreas, what kind of risks do we have as we roll into ETH2?
So I think the risks are mainly from an economic nature, centralization of value at risk, right? I mean, pretty much everything, especially in ETH2, hinges on the value at risk, both the value at risk that is used to secure the network, or the networks, really plural, with shards, and the value at risk in the different protocols. As more and more protocols are transitioning to Layer2, both, whether it's Compound, Uniswap, it's like pretty much everybody and their cousin is working on an L2. The real challenge is going to be pretty much what has been coined as miner extractable value. So the incentive of miners to censor, delay, front run transactions. In this case, not necessarily on L2, but the anchoring transactions that are happening from L2, because there are going to be not going to be millions of L2s or even thousands, or maybe a couple of dozens, maybe a few hundred. So they're known, and so there is significant risk that you will drive up transaction costs, making it too expensive for regular people to utilize non-L2 applications.
We're gonna have to cut you off there. Daniel, do you have either rebuttal or do you have anything else in terms of benefits of ETH2?
Yeah, I do think that the upcoming EIP 1559 addresses the issue that Andreas talks about partially. I mean, using once the EIP comes into play, when you have the base fee, you'll be able to include your transaction, even though there's basically the block size won't be limited as it is now. So I do think that this EIP will slightly reduce the risks and mitigate it.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to so-called EthKillers. So EthKillers are in reference to other layer 1 networks that are not necessarily connected to Ethereum that promise potentially additional benefits or scalability. Taz, is ETH2 or layer 2 negate this advantage and keep Ethereum in the lead?
I think largely it does, because the main benefit that most of these so-called EthKillers have promoted is scalability, which they have generally achieved through making sacrifices in either security or decentralization. And Ethereum has been unwilling to make these sacrifices and taken the hard path to ETH2, which has taken longer. But with ETH2 and layer 2, we've got scalability, and I think the so-called EthKillers no longer have that as an advantage.
Okay, great. Andreas, do you have any, with respect to any of the EthKillers, are there any interesting elements that people should be looking at, potentially taking ideas from? Anything exciting in that space that people in the Ethereum community may want to learn from?
So I think that the systemic risk question is the same, whether it's Ethereum or any other network. That doesn't change. What I think is like EthKillers, like, quote unquote, because I don't like that word, competing offerings, such as Polkadot or Cardano. They are very well designed. They're very well thought out, and because they took longer and they didn't have the technical debt that Ethereum carried with it, they could move faster, and have an advantage in terms of what they have. Scalability, security is as high. Obviously, once ETH2 is fully live, including sharding, then that advantage will have gone. But that is another year and a half out, if we're maybe 2. So in that time, the question is, do we see significant take up, mainstream adoption? Are NFTs going to blow up totally? And if that happens, people will have to look for alternatives. NBA Hotshots runs on Flow. Not much else runs on Flow, but that's a pretty big deal. So the question is, what's going to happen with adoption over the next couple of years until ETH2 is fully live?
Okay, great, thank you. Didier, we'll go to you. One of the views is that Ethereum has too much of a leadway, too much of an ecosystem. Is that, do you support that in terms of, do you want to talk about the community around Ethereum? And is that a moat in a sense?
Yeah, because I mean, obviously the communities and the ecosystems are massive. The security tooling, developer tooling, the maturity of applications and the maturity even of the community itself in regards to the technology is a massive advantage. So I think in that sense, Ethereum killer is not a very helpful label at this point. Conversely, some of them have a ton of money to continue building for quite a while, right? So I don't think Ethereum will kill them either. So we'll probably live in a world where both will coexist. Ethereum will be dominant in my view. And some of the Ethereum killer will jump on some of the sort of, I wouldn't say niche, but some specific use cases where they think they can gain adoption and they will continue to exist, and some of them will thrive even. But I believe Ethereum will remain dominant.
Great. Daniel, do you want to add, or do you have any thoughts on whether some of these become layer 2 solutions?
I could add one thing to the ecosystem. So I do think that seeing so large players and enterprises going into the space is actually validates that the values for the people in the Ethereum ecosystem are correct and are they contribute to the long-term success of the network. So that's a proof that we in Ethereum have the right thoughts so far in terms of the network.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's move on to scalability solutions. So layer 2 and scalability. Layer 2 sometimes has a wide definition of just any sort of ETH connected scalability solution. In other cases, some prefer a much more narrower definition around rollups and others. But Didier, in terms of scalability solutions, can you talk about the different needs that enterprises might have versus public or other types of decentralized apps?
Yeah, I mean, you'll find the same. It's not the same technology, but maybe slightly different flavors. Partly because some enterprises might not want to touch tokens, or they might not. So they have their own constraints. So it means, for example, rollup might take a slightly different form in an enterprise use case, like a CBDC use case or retail CBDC use case, for example. It might have more of a trust element to it in the setup. For example, relying on a POA network of operators, for example, to ensure computational integrity. So I think it will just be the same tech, but slightly different flavor, at least for the people who operate on permission networks. I do think, though, that some enterprises are looking at public infrastructure, whatever it is, L1, L2s, and are really now seriously exploring the use of this infrastructure. They'll probably be much slower to adopt L2s because they won't want to be exposed to the token, security risk issues, etc. in the first phase. And they might favor the use of sidechains, actually, if it's public infrastructure. But I think overall it's the same tech, slightly different flavors, more trust assumption, probably, such as to reach like maybe greater scalability. But we'll see them also adopting some of the public L2s as well.
Okay, great. We'll come back to you on that subject, but let's go to maybe the rollups. Taz, do you want to give a quick case for rollups and whether that's optimistic or ZK?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think we have time to get into the differences between them, but rollups in general keep all layer 2 transactions as data on layer 1. They're not transacted on layer 1, but they're stored on layer 1 for data availability, so that if the layer 2 operator goes away, you always have the ability to prove what happened and to withdraw your funds or continue operating with your tokens. So in that sense, rollups are more decentralized than most of the other layer 2s. They don't rely on any single party or anybody to keep that data online and available. And that's why I think they're probably a good choice for things like DeFi or other things where decentralization is a very important, is essential. But I'd like to point out that I think enterprises, in some enterprise applications, decentralization may not be as important because enterprises are centralized. They're used to centralization. All their whole IT infrastructures are centralized. So there are some enterprise applications where centralization may be reasonable and acceptable, and therefore choosing a solution other than rollups might be even better for those applications.
Great, great. So Andreas, so you've mentioned some of the downsides or potential alternatives, but Andreas, do you have any risks or the cons with rollups? Are there any issues with rollups, whether it's delayed finality potentially? Is it with ZK, is it the high compute cost and the large machines you might need? What are the downsides that rollups may have?
So really, it is especially when you're thinking about privacy preservation, the amount of data you're going to have to put on chain with every single transaction. If you look at the average transaction size of a ZK rollup or even optimistic rollup is quite substantial. And EIP 1559 only partially addresses that because it has a hard cap of 25 million. So unless we're substantially increasing the gas limit, just every single byte costs you 2 gas. So it's like there's a natural bottleneck there. That means as L2 is getting more and more popular, you are de facto centralizing value yet again. And again, that make you vulnerable to censoring attacks, to driving up transaction fees. I could very well see a world in a couple of years, if this is really successful, where you will see transaction fees of $1 million per transactions. Why? Because the miners can claim that much, because there are only 20, 25 rollups that are doing assets, and everything is de facto centralized there. So
great.
It's
great. Thank you, Didier. So let's talk to you, then Daniel will include you as well. But Didier, do you have any? So we talked about rollups, but are there other other types of scalability solutions that are ETH based, ETH connected in some form, that offer advantages of scalability?
Yeah, I think some sidechain technology will remain relevant. Obviously, they don't derive their security from L1 in the same way. Typically, there's still an element of L1 security in the sense that people who want to participate and validate blocks in those sidechains might have to stake onto L1, like in the case of Scale Network. I think they offer the advantage of relying on exactly the same tooling, software as the Ethereum one in large part. So from that sense, they are battle tested, and they can still reach significant scalability in terms of throughput and transaction per second. So they have drawbacks compared to rollups, but I think they'll remain relevant. Some of them anyway.
And you have experience with others as well, correct? Is Palm and Beijing?
Yeah. So I mean, yes, we are. I mean, it's public that now we are working on our own sidechain technology for NFTs, for example, and that's the name of this Palm project. So again, I think you can use bridging to move tokens from mainnet to the sidechain. It has the benefit of simplicity. In fairness, I think. So I think they'll remain relevant, and we'll see a landscape with sidechains technologies, with L2s and ZK rollup, optimistic rollups, and it's going to be a combination. And in that sense, I agree with the comment in the chat that technologies like Connects are quite important to ensure transfer of liquidity across those different technologies.
Okay, great. So Daniel, do you have any comments with your experience working with various ETH scaling solutions?
I think that one of the promising things that will come to Ethereum mainnet soon is the BOS precompile. And I think that would actually enable even more interesting bridge and sidechain solutions, since we'll be able to have not only 20, 50, or 30 validators, but we might have, for example, thousands of validators. That would enable us to do very interesting sidechains, as Didier mentioned. So yeah, I'm excited for BOS precompiles on Ethereum.
Okay, great. We have 2 more minutes left. So 1 minute, Andreas. Is there systematic risk in the widespread adoption of L2? So 1 minute.
Yeah, the answer is yes. It's the same thing that you have with minor extractable value that you have now today's with current protocols. That is not going to change. The infrastructure might be decentralized, But if value is centralized, then that always prevents systemic risk, especially if the value at risk is significantly larger than the security guarantees of the underlying network.
Great, thank you. Taz, do you want to close us out with anything in terms of what elements need to be built, or what schedule, time frame to expect great things in layer 2 on scalability?
Well, I think this year it's really getting exciting because I've been following the development of layer 2s for the last several years, and now we're really starting to see that work mature and flower, and we're seeing layer 2 in the wild being adopted by real projects and real users. But there are still some things that need to happen before it's really going to be widespread and used by the majority of applications and users. I think that's largely around user experience. So wallets need to support layer 2s. We need to have better UX for users to get in and out of layer 2s and to conduct across layer 2s, and also interoperability. Layer 2s can be kind of isolated silos, and they need to be interoperable with each other. So there's work being done to develop standards and ways for L2s to interact with each other. That's still coming along, but it needs to be a little bit more developed before we'll see kind of everything on layer 2.
Great, thank you. Excellent summary. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And let's sign off, and we'll bring Taz back on to bring on and round it out with our fireside chat. So thanks everyone. We'll see you later. Thank you. Bye.